Conor McGregor is perhaps the greatest example of just how much charisma can rocket a career. Though it's not to say he wasn't an animal in the octagon during his prime, this desire for attention shown by all fighters ensures that the UFC remains a hotbed of news. And in today's video, we're going to go through how Henry Cejudo believes the Predator will leave UFC and earn $40 million by fighting Tyson Fury. Next up, Ngannou to fight Fury? One of the hottest stories in not only UFC but all of the world of combat sports is of course the current will they won't they situation we find ourselves locked in between Francis Ngannou and Tyson Fury. Obviously, in most circumstances, that sort of trope is a romance plot, but fight fans have been left rabidly excited and optimistic that we're going to see Ngannou and Fury get together and beat the hell out of each other inside the squared circle. Since the turn of the year, the speculation over whether we'll get to see UFC heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou go up against WBC heavyweight champion Tyson Fury in a mouth-watering boxing fight for the ages, and pretty much everyone in the world of combat sports has been talking about it. Former UFC champion Henry Cejudo is the latest to offer his thoughts on the prospective super fight, having spoken about the subject on his show, the Triple C and Schmo Show. Cejudo was quick to stress that he doesn't have any secret knowledge and can't confirm that the fight will happen, but spitballed that Ngannou could stand to make roughly $40 million if he does decide to take on Fury. With such an absurd amount of money on the line, Cejudo suggested that the Predator will be smart and go for the once-in-a-lifetime purse. According to Cejudo, this astronomical amount of money is just waiting for Ngannou to pick up. And so he doesn't believe that the UFC heavyweight champion will be looking at any fight right now besides a clash with Fury. This is an unfortunate state of affairs for Jon Jones, who Cejudo has spent time coaching and would personally love to see get a shot at Ngannou, as he obviously doesn't represent anywhere near the level of money that a fight with Fury would bring in. Cejudo went on to note that he believes the UFC have likely offered Ngannou a lot more money than they ever would have before all of this speculation began, but that it will likely still not be enough to stop Ngannou from taking the mammoth payday that stepping into a boxing ring will guarantee. It should be noted that Dana White has, for the most part, spoken positively of a potential Ngannou-Fury fight, and was a key figure in putting together the Conor McGregor vs. Floyd Mayweather bout, so there's every chance that a deal could be made without Ngannou actually leaving the UFC. Moving on, Schaub backs Mitchell amidst controversy. One of the most important parts of being a star in the UFC isn't even anything to do with what you get done in the octagon. Obviously, you can't succeed without doing the business when it comes to the fight time, but an ability that catapults a good fighter to a huge draw is the ability to stand out and get people talking. For better or for worse, Bryce Mitchell has been very good at getting people talking about him in recent weeks, with his latest stunt resulting in massive controversy. What he'd do that attracted so much attention in such a small space of time? Mitchell was a guest recently at Ariel Helwani's show, The MMA Hour, and it was while speaking on this show that he touched a variety of hot topics, offering controversial views on issues such as gun laws, school shootings, and the United States government. Many have taken issue with Mitchell's comments, but former MMA fighter Brendan Schaub, host of The Schaub Show, has recently come to Mitchell's defense and even taken things a step further by praising Dana White for not censoring UFC fighters, addressing the criticism being directed towards Mitchell and his comments, which also included views on COVID-19 vaccines. Schaub asked what the critics wanted, accusing them of wanting Mitchell to not express himself and be the cookie-cutter guy, who only ever talks about their training. Schaub says these generic responses from UFC fighters are something he hates, and so Mitchell's decision to speak his mind is a breath of fresh air that should be praised. And that praise should also be extended to UFC boss Dana White, who has cultivated an environment where fighters are free to express themselves. Schaub suggested that if Mitchell were an NBA or NFL player, he would have quickly had his thoughts suppressed by either organization or referred to the UFC's rather lax rules as one of the core reasons that the company has been able to support increasingly popular athletes. Dana White has reaffirmed his support for Mitchell even more recently, as in response to Mitchell vowing to donate half of his purse from his win over Edson Barboza, the UFC head honcho offered to shoulder that donation for Mitchell. Islam Makhachev fires back at Dana White. The UFC is a pretty macho competition built off of egos. The whole point is that everyone who steps into the octagon is a hard-as-nails killer who would beat down the average person within a few seconds. With that in mind, UFC fighters don't tend to take it too well whenever the implication is made that they're scared of someone or that they're ducking a fight, and someone who will know all about that is Islam Makhachev. Makhachev is one of the top lightweights the the UFC has at the moment, boasting an overall MMA record of 22-1, with a UFC record of 11-1. He has won his last 10 fights in a row. His most recent victory saw him stop Bobby Green in the first round, making his campaign for a title shot borderline undeniable. It was after this impressive win against Green that Makhachev surprised many by offering to step in to fight Rafael dos Anjos at UFC 272. After news broke that RDA's fight against Rafael Fiziev was off due to the latter having contracted COVID-19. Many were confused by this since it would have been such short notice for Makhachev, as well as the fact that it would have been his second UFC fight within a single week. It's always a risky proposition to take something like that on, especially given that a defeat could have set back his chase of the lightweight belt. When asked why he was volunteering for the fight, Islam claimed that it was for the fans, as he didn't want them to be disappointed at having a big PPV fight removed without replacement. As we all know, the fight did not end up happening, and there have been many conflicting stories on why exactly we never got to see it. Dana White claimed that it was Makhachev himself who turned down the fight, with Dos Anjos taking the MMA Hour and claiming that the reason for the denial was that the UFC were unwilling to pay Makhachev the purse of $1 million that he requested. Islam has been quick to deny any suggestions, arguing that it was he who contacted the UFC in the first place with regards to volunteering for the fight, and that money was not what stopped the bout from happening. In Makhachev's words, he asked for a very small condition, and the UFC said no, leading to the discussion falling apart. Finally, Carlos Felipe released. In our final story of today's video, shocking news as Brazilian fighter Carlos Felipe has been released by the UFC after being hit with a suspension from the Nevada Athletic Commission. A heavyweight fighter with a professional record of 11 wins and 2 losses in the world of MMA, Felipe fought to a close decision loss back in October of 2021 when he came up against Andrei Arlovski. But it was the news that broke after the fight that really made headlines. Carlos had tested positive for boldenone, an anabolic steroid that is prohibited by the UFC and the NAC, as it gives users a clear and unfair advantage over their fellow athletes. Obviously, this advantage wasn't enough to see Felipe through the victory, but the NAC didn't really care if the amount of steroids you took wasn't enough to get you a win, and promptly handed Felipe an 18-month suspension in January of this year. He was also fined around $4,200 from his purse money and given a prosecution fee of just under $500. Fortunately for Carlos, well, as fortunate as you can be after being caught taking drugs, his ban started retroactively from the night he failed the test, so he will be cleared to begin competing in April of 2023. But unfortunately for Carlos, the UFC aren't particularly interested in waiting around for him. MMA Junkie confirmed the news this week that the UFC have decided to release Felipe from his contract, as this is the second time that he has failed a drug test. Back in 2017, he achieved one of the worst first impressions ever by getting caught using another steroid ahead of his UFC debut. That infraction earned him a 2-year suspension that completely delayed his UFC career. And that's everything. Will we see Ngannou fight Fury? What do you think of Mitchell Bryce? Will we see Felipe back for the UFC after his suspension? Let us know down in the comments. And until next time, we'll see you soon.